All right, so we're back to the speaker's corner. And after talking about Generation Z and esports and fusion energy, we're now coming back to a very, very human topic. And with me, I have now Sophia Swire, who is an award-winning social entrepreneur. And Sophia has a really cool story herself. She's coming from the banker background from the city of London and then decided to leave it and go to the Hindu Kush. And what she has found there, she will talk to us about today. And last night at dinner, she said that where London, the city, was the hell for her, she found heaven at the Hindu Kush. So I'm very, very excited about her talk. Take it away, Sophia.
I also wanted to take a moment to remember the women, the millions of women from less fortunate cultures who risk their lives on a daily basis for their basic human rights. The women, for instance, in this photograph here, the teacher wearing her pink shalwar kameez, the young ladies who she's teaching here in this remote school on the Afghan-Pakistan border, who risk their lives for their basic right to an education. The women who risk their lives for access to work opportunity, the women who risk their lives for the right to wear what they want at home or in public, like the young Iranian lady who was imprisoned yesterday for 2 years, her charge corrupting the youth by taking off her hijab, her headscarf. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've come a long way. The Me Too campaign, the Time's Up campaign, is showing light on just how much work there is still to be done in the West, but globally there's an awful lot of work to do. So I've been asked today to tell you a little bit about my personal journey as a social entrepreneur, and my life started in Generation X, I learned today, which makes me a contrarian by nature. I grew up in a very traditional English family household. My father, who's pictured here on his way to Ascot, tried to do his best to prevent me from going to university. He was worried I would turn into what was called in those days a blue stocking. And my brothers laid bets to see how quickly I would drop out of university, but I proved them all wrong. And when it came to entering the workplace, I chose a very male environment, the institutional equity dealing room floor of Kleinmort Benson that had, I think it was maybe 500 men and me, maybe 1 or 2 other girls. And I worked happily in the city, building up a client base from the Vatican to the Bank of Spain and so on, until the stock market crash. That's me in London in the 1980s. The crash in October 1987 changed a lot of things for a lot of people. Certainly the atmosphere in the city changed for the worse, and when I came back from my lunches, I would find my colleagues left and right had been fired, their desks unceremoniously cleared with no warning, and I found myself praying that I too would be fired and given a payoff, as they had been, to go off and do something that I considered had more value in life, more purpose. So I took matters into my own hands, and I decided to go off to the Hindu Kush on the Afghan-Pakistan border, which had the highest concentration of aid workers and foreign correspondents at the time. I wanted to see how it would feel to try on a different kind of job before I took the leap. And I ended up in the most beautiful land in the world. I call it my spiritual home, Chitral, which is a landlocked principality right up on the Afghan-Pakistan border, which was independent until the 1960s. Because it's landlocked and because it's so remote, it's also one of the poorest places on earth. There's very high male unemployment, especially at that time in the 1980s. And of course, being a cultural backwater, it was also very conservative for girls. Young girls, pre-puberty, were allowed to run around with headscarves, or indeed without them, but as soon as they reached the age of 11 or 12, they had to wear a headscarf, a hijab, cover their faces in public, and there was very little opportunity for them educationally and indeed work-wise, zero opportunity. So when I arrived in 1988, actually, initially, there was less than 3% literacy rates for girls in the region. And the knock-on effect of that was that there were very few, in fact, there were no educated and qualified female doctors or nurses in the region, which caused the highest infant and maternal mortality rates in the region as well. It was also home to 2 million Afghan refugees, being one of the main thoroughfares for arms into the region. There were a large number of very impoverished and illiterate refugee children, many of whom had lost their limbs stepping on Russian landmines. So the Deputy Commissioner came up to me on my 25th birthday and said to me, "You look like the kind of girl I need to help me set up a school." And I said, "Why me?" And he said, "Well, there are no educated local women. I'm keen to set up an establishment where local children can have an excellent education, and my long-term ambition is to transform the economy of this region." So he said, "When you go back to England, please pick up your bonus from Kleinmore Benson and spend it on school books and equipment, and while you're at it, please bring out some of your friends, and we're going to set up an English medium school." So that's exactly what I did. And this here on my left there is my friend Miss Jilly. She was known as Miss Jilly. I was known as Miss Sophia. There were about 5 of us in the early days. This is Miss Claire. She's actually our former Prime Minister David Cameron's little sister, who came out to teach for a year. And we accepted boys and girls in the early years. The school now has 1,000 children and is considered one of the best schools for hundreds of miles around. And what it did was it showed me the transformative power of education, not just for the girls involved, the individual girls and boys and their parents, but in terms of really transforming the aspirations of the entire community. And when I went back a few years later, I discovered that the children we had taught in those days have indeed become doctors, nurses, teachers, architects, engineers, lawyers, and they have indeed pulled up by the bootstraps the economy of the region, which is now truly buzzing. It's also one of the most peaceful regions in the area, and girls are happily attending school. The Taliban are being kept at bay. So this is the power of education when it's presented, especially to girls. So in order to finance myself, I set up a fashion business. I went off to Kathmandu in Nepal, and I discovered the Pashmina shawl. Now, some of you may remember what the Pashmina shawl is. It's a beautiful silk cashmere wrap, and I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. So I discovered that the Pashmina came from a cashmere goat that was indigenous to the region. This here is a number of ladies from Tibet who are looking after the Pashmina cashmere goats on the Tibetan-Nepalese border. And I realized that if you could work with local natural resources and help local women get into the economy, you would be essentially helping them work themselves out of poverty. So I went to work with a number of local businesses. I checked on the working conditions for the artisans, especially the women, and I then brought them back to the UK, and I was very fortunate to get them into British Vogue. On the left here we have Christy Turlington, who was a huge supermodel in the 80s and 90s. So my fashion brand was launched on the shoulders of Christy Turlington and Kate Moss, and we managed to get it into Harrods. It was the best-selling soft accessories line in Harrods for a decade, and then we obviously sold all over the world as well, and it became quite a fashion phenomenon. In addition to that, we were able to finance some of the schools for the Afghan refugees in Peshawar with the proceeds. So it was really the first time I was modelling this idea of a for-profit business with purpose. At the end of 2007, I was approached by a British charity called Turquoise Mountain, who asked me to go back to Afghanistan and set up a jewellery school. I was longing for Afghanistan and Pakistan, for the region again. I hadn't been there for a number of years. And Afghanistan is naturally very rich in minerals, so to me it made perfect sense to train the locals in value-added skills of gem setting, gem cutting and jewellery manufacturing. So we set up the jewellery school. I insisted that half the students were girls, of course, very important to empower girls and women always. And I, being of a curious frame of mind, decided to go off to the mines to check out the conditions for the workers, to make sure that there were no child labourers, and to see what could be done to improve the whole value chain. And what I discovered was that the mines are generally located in very remote areas. You can see here a landmine field that's being cleared by very brave Afghan engineers. And I occasionally had to be flown down in a helicopter in wearing full body armour, which I always thought was a little over the top, until these two very nice gentlemen here on the left who were part of the forward operating base in the Panjshir Valley, tragically lost their lives in a suicide bomb attack 1 week after this photograph was taken. And after that, I took my personal security rather more seriously. This here is a walk up to the emerald mines in the Panjshir Valley. It was a 6-hour walk. You can see that probably taking a mule or a horse is which is what the locals do, is probably a better mode of transport. When I got to the top, I found that the gentlemen were lighting fuses and running for their lives, and then hopefully making it out of the caves in time to light a cigarette and relax. This gentleman made it this time. Not all of them were so lucky. So artisanal mining is done generally in groups of 5 to 12 men. In Afghanistan, they use rudimentary tools. Here they're using shovels. I've had a go with a crowbar and a hammer at the lapis mines in the north of Afghanistan. And on the top right, I'm carrying a recycled missile, which is filled with industrial-grade dynamite, which the Afghans traditionally are using to explode the gemstone resources out of the mountain, which is not good for the gemstones, and certainly not good for them. So, in order to rectify some of these challenges, in 2012 I set up Future Brilliance, initially as an Afghan charity, and then we registered it in the US and in the UK. And the aim was really to address the whole value chain, to introduce more women into the sector, and to train the artisans in business skills, digital skills, and design, and so on and so forth, so that they could create a sustainable business using their local natural resources. Here on the left, we're training them in digital literacy. We equip them with solar-powered tablet computers, and even the illiterate women took to it like ducks to water. We took them to Jaipur for 6 months to train them up in the highest possible skills of gem faceting, jewellery manufacturing, and also gave them work experience. And then they came back to Kabul and started working with the local women to produce a jewellery line that we helped them create called Ayenda, which means future in the local language Dari. So the Ayenda jewellery line is really inspired by this extraordinary woman, Khala Zainab, who's pictured here designing part of the first Ayenda collection. She's a woman in her now early 50s. She's a war widow, and she has trained hundreds of women in bead making, producing these extraordinarily fine lapis and turquoise beads. I have some with me to show you here today. As you can see, they're so fine they could be mistaken for silk thread. And these beads are made at home by women throughout the north of Afghanistan, and also by men. But Khala Zainab employs 300 war widows, and for them this is really a lifeline. So I was very keen to incorporate as many of these beads as we could into the initial Ayenda line, so that we could ensure that there was maximum job opportunity for illiterate women in rural areas who really had no other way to survive. And we also worked and trained young Afghan designers. This piece here, the beautiful lapis locket that you can see with the crisscross gold design, was developed by Adila Wadat, who we trained. And we also trained her in marketing, sales. She helped us get Ayenda onto the front cover of Cosmopolitan and Rappaport, which is the industry's leading magazine in the jewellery trade. And she also co-founded the Ayenda Jewellery Cooperative, which is comprised now of about 11 founder companies, over half of which are women-run. And I'm now in the process of handing over the management and ownership of the Ayenda Jewellery Trading Company into the hands of these highly capable and now highly trained Afghan artisans who have elected a financier as their chairperson. So I'm fully confident that I can now hand over, and that it will be sustainable and will survive without my ongoing micromanagement. Which brings me to where I go next. So I've now been back in the West for a couple of years, and I've been continuing to build access to markets for the artisans and wondering what's next for me. And in recent months, probably triggered partly by the whole sort of resurgent rise in feminine power and opportunity in business and politics and now finance, I've been approached by a number of women entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and New York and London and elsewhere, asking me to help them raise finance and to advise them and help them build their boards. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I received a message just yesterday from a girl who's going to South by Southwest, and she, amongst the other ones, I'm going to be building a board of advisors of very, very senior women executives who have succeeded in venture capital, private equity, and running their own businesses, and who are now ready to act as mentors to young female founders looking to build businesses with purpose in the West and indeed globally. And we're going to be focusing on the areas of tech and health, education and sustainability. And so really for me it's now full circle. My life has come full circle. I'm going back into the city, but this time it will be with passion and with purpose. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much, Sophia. You're a professional storyteller. I actually don't have as many questions as I just have amazing story, great woman. We need more women like her. So I absolutely agree. And we actually do have some questions from the audience that we would like to pose. So first of all, my question would be, you went into this very, very different region of the world, and as a beautiful blonde woman. So what was the experience there? Like, what did you encounter? And you were empowering women who are also in a different relationship to men and their husbands and the patriarchy in their country. So what can you share about that?
Right. Well, that's always a very, very interesting question for me, because people expect me to have had some very major challenges in some of the remote Islamic regions that I've worked and lived over the years.
Yeah.
But I have to say that I have experienced more danger, if that's the right word, in the West from men than I have in Asia, in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, those areas which I consider to be my second home.
Yeah.
My experience of men in Afghanistan and Pakistan, I'm very fortunate, but my experience is that they treat women with a great deal of respect if you know how to respect their local customs. So I always made sure that I dressed modestly. I did wear the local headscarf because I didn't want to put myself in danger. So for the most part, I did wear the local headscarf. So to be honest with you, I experienced only respect. And I think as a woman, as a Western woman in some of those countries, you're treated as a third sex. So you're actually given access and the respect that they would normally give a man. But at the same time, you're given the respect and you're protected as a woman. It's my personal experience. Not everyone has been so lucky.
Yeah, well, great. And so people asked a couple of times, like, how can we support you, like, with your projects?
Okay. Well, there are many ways to support. One very practical way to support would be to purchase a piece of Allende jewelry. Allende sells for between about $50 and about $1,500, so it really is accessible, and that's a very practical way. You can go to allendejewelry.com and invest in a piece of Allende jewelry. But if you're interested in being a part of this new endeavor, which is working to empower female entrepreneurs in the West and globally, then I'm sure on this plane there's a load of amazing women CEOs and founders. If you're interested to talk about joining our advisory board or our investment management board, please come and find me, or you can email me at sophiaswire@gmail.com. I posted the email address on the final slide.
Perfect. There's no questions. There has been questions where to get the jewelry and what the price range is. Thanks for touching on that. So there's another question on how do you actually work with the profits that are being generated from those, I would assume, really successful companies that are founded. Are you investing it back to the region? Like, how does this process work?
So the business model for Allende, which is a US registered charity, which actually owns the trading company, the social enterprise Allende Jewelry LLC at the moment, is that 10% on cost of goods is donated up into the charity, which forwards it to the Allende Jewelry Cooperative for whatever purposes they need. So in addition to receiving commissions for work and 10% design commissions if they have designed the line, they also receive 10% royalty to invest in equipment or finish their buildings or whatever, receive more training. And then at the moment, the rest of the margin goes on building up the brand, continuing to develop access to markets. Within the next few weeks, the entire company will be owned and managed and run by the Afghans, so it'll be 100% Afghan owned.
Interesting.
But right now, it's based on a sort of royalty and commission system.
Cool, thanks. So going back to the Islamic culture, like we're here to build bridges instead of building up walls. So what would you say is the most fascinating thing, as you said, it's your second home, about the culture in Afghanistan? Like what fascinates you about it?
So one of the things that drew me to Afghanistan in the first place was the incredible strength of spirit and grace and humility of the Afghan people. So I first encountered an Afghan when I was about 15 years old at a benefit in London, at a ball in London. A number of Afghan Mujahideen commanders had been flown in and to attend this Afghan Aid ball, and they stood up on the podium. Most of them had one leg. The other leg at that time was a wooden stub, basically. It was before the time of prosthetics. And they spoke with so much grace and strength and passion and a total absence of self-pity that I was really blown away by their inherent character. I couldn't believe that people could be going through such hardship and not be in any way self-conscious. So, and then after that, the front cover of the National Geographic magazine, you may remember, before your time, but Steve McCurry, who's a wonderful war journalist, took an amazing seminal photograph of a green-eyed Afghan refugee girl in a refugee camp on the Pakistan side of the border. It was on the front cover of Nat Geo, and that photograph of that young child suffering, in all her raw pain, and you could see through her soul. It tore through my heart, but it was again her beauty, her integrity, and her passion, and her soul. That can be said of all the Afghan people, and it really draws me from the heart.
Well, thank you very much, Sophia. There's a couple more questions about why you're doing it, but the time is up, unfortunately. So go meet Sophia directly, network with her. I'm sure she's going to tell you why she's doing those kind of projects. So thank you very much. We're continuing with the program.
Thank you very much.